Joining us to discuss this is the Sun's columnist Trevor Kavanagh. Trevor, good morning. What did you make of that interview with Harry Cole?
Well, I think Harry's done the job. I think he's actually prized out of the Labour health spokesman and hopefully the whole of the Labour Party the admission that they've got it terribly wrong. What they haven't said is how many children, young people have had their lives ruined by the sort of treatment and medical attention and indeed surgery that has destroyed some of their lives.
The interesting thing for me is, and I said this yesterday, Trevor, and you've got so much experience, you'll be able to answer this. For me, the big issue, we talked about it all week, is actually that any time you try and have a trans debate, for want of a better thing, you get accused of all sorts of things. There's certain things in this country you can't talk about. I think the very fact this woman took 4 years and has highlighted the thing about children is the most important thing. And whether Labour is jumping in line or whether the Tories should have done more after 14 years, the fact of the matter is, to young kids who don't know their minds, going through surgery, giving puberty blockers, for me the whole thing centres on, Trevor, I've been saying it for 48 hours, it shouldn't be an instantaneous decision. It should be done in the right way with counselling and the involvement of both parents and all sorts of people. And actually, we are all as a society responsible. We need to say, yes, this can happen, but we need to make safeguards right and proper, don't we?
Well, I think that 99.9%, to quote Keir Starmer's figures, would agree with every word you say there. And if people had listened to the overwhelming majority of people in this country with common sense, this would never have happened.
Yeah, great.
But this is sort of mass hysteria that comes not just with vulnerable adolescents who are going through difficult times. It's a sort of mass hysteria which is engulfing us all in the culture wars, and not just on trans, which is the most difficult one of all. There's the problem of climate change, net zero, and all of the problems with Islamophobia. This is why we have the hate crime in Scotland, almost entirely because of the trans issue.
And we did that earlier. 7,000, wasn't it, Nick? 7,000 hate crimes, 7,800, have been reported in the last 7 days to the Scottish police. You know, Hamza used this idea of hate crimes, and they're only following up on 200. Not on the streets dealing with burglaries and people being attacked, like that terribly poor woman in Bradford. All sorts of stuff. What I'm saying is, when we talk about culture wars, we talk about woke, we talk about this, we need to be able to have these debates, don't we, Trev, without feeling frightened. I mean, I'm old enough to remember you couldn't mention immigration 10 years ago because you were called racist. But we need to have these discussions.
But we talk about trans issues every day on this channel. We talk about immigration every day.
No, we do, because this channel does it.
You can't possibly say that we can't talk about it. It's just the ways in which it's spoken about and the criticism that it receives, and where I think criticism is completely valid and needed, but where that goes from being critical to harassing somebody for their views.
The big problem here is that you cannot say anything, as you just described, until someone else stands up with authority like Dr. Miriam Cass or J.K. Rowling and actually speaks on behalf of the great majority of this country. And therefore there's a voice that we can echo and report, and it has traction, but ordinary people are ignored and swept aside on so many issues today which are dividing this country in a way which I think is causing serious problems to society, which may be permanent unless there's...
Why are we... legally speaking, it is true to say that somebody who has legally transitioned is legally defined as whatever sex they've transitioned to. So it is already within law.
It's within law, but it's not... you cannot simply change biological sex, and that is it, full stop. If you were born a male, you remain a male, even if you decide to identify as a female. That is common sense. And it's biological sense, it's scientific sense, and you cannot overturn scientific rules.
Can I bring it to the political side? I mean, one of the things, we started this at 6 o'clock this morning. We criticise our politicians a lot, Trev, and we say, oh, they don't listen. Is Wes Streeting, taking the opposite view a minute, is he actually acknowledging that opinions change? Is he listening to people and saying, yeah, I got it wrong? Should we criticise him for that? Should we say, you're just doing what all politicians do, you're trying to curry favour and get a job, you're trying to get into government? Or should we say, actually, he's doing what politicians fail to do so often, which is listen to the British people?
Yes, I think Wes Streeting is a breath of fresh air in the Labour Party in particular, which seems to tie itself in knots with all of the culture wars and the verities and the things you can say and you can't say.
I think he's a future Prime Minister, Trevor.
I think he sees himself as a future Prime Minister, and I think he's staking out the ground very, very carefully for that, because he is the only person in the Labour Party at the moment who's actually saying what is otherwise unsayable.
It's interesting, though, because he did say that. He didn't actually nail his colours to the mast and do a definition. I don't think we necessarily need that from him. He's admitted, though, that it is a very nuanced issue. As we were just discussing there, when you were talking about woman, you were thinking about the biological version of the definition, whereas I was thinking about the legal definition. Now, of course, both of those things can be true and contrast at the same time, and yet we're not hurling insults or harassing each other for having done that.
The discussion.
But exactly, but at the centre of this is a vulnerable group, is a group of people who have had difficulty with their self-identification, their identification, who they are as a person. And it's been used so much, isn't it, by both sides as this political football, whereas actually, do you think we should be approaching this issue with far more compassion?
Well, I think that they deserve compassion, and I think they are a vulnerable group. Yeah. They should not be transforming society to cope with their vulnerability.
Right.
We should not all be running around assuming that you can change biological sex simply because of a vulnerable group who needs sympathy. That applies to an awful lot of other people in society. You cannot change society to adapt to one small vocal group.
Well, Trevor, speaking of vulnerable groups...
Now, this is Trevor. You don't know we're going to ambush you this, but I expect a massive smile on your face.
A bloke fed up with negativity over his name has set up a support group for people called Trevor.
Have you seen this in The Sun, mate? Trevor Cunningham, 66, says he wants to stop the maligned moniker being leaked to geeks and nitwits. That's outrageous, man, in your paper.
I plead guilty to nitwit, but not to geek.
I thought if I could get Trevors from all over the world to offer their services for free to other Trevors, people would then associate the name with kindness. The once popular title shared by the likes of Trevor Brooking, broadcaster Trevor MacDonald, and the legend that is Trevor Kavanagh, The Sun, fell out of favour in the 1970s.
I think it's
didn't know
name.
this. I never realised I was part of a vulnerable group, and therefore I need to change the law.
Ian Jury's 1977 song, Clever Trevor, apparently, I think this is outrageous. It's a classy name, Trevor, isn't it?
Well, in 2020, only 11 babies were given that name. But these names come back in fashion, don't they?
Listen, Jeremy's the worst name you could call a child in the history of the world. But Jeremy
Little
Bear and the
baby
Sugar
Jeremy.
Puff are ridiculous. So
Yeah,
I'd rather sympathise with Trevor, really.
Most of us don't like our first name.
Do you not like the name Trevor?
My middle name is Michael, which is what my father wanted to christen me. My mother fancied Trevor Howard, who was a famous actor at the time, so I was lumbered with the name Trevor.
I wonder why I was called Jeremy. My mother ate Sugar Puffs or something. Listen, Trevor Kavanagh, you're a legend. Thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you so much,
Very
Trevor
interested to get your
Kavanagh.
angle, my friend.